So I'm just going to give an update on some of the stuff we've been doing on the west branch of the Maple. I see that Tony is on, so he can correct anything I say that is not correct when I'm done about the beaver work, because he certainly has more information, more detailed information about that than I do, but I'll give a little bit of an overview of it. So there we go. Okay, so I'm going to go over the temperature data we collected in 2020, and then we'll talk about the beaver mitigation efforts. And I'm going to go through a little bit of the background on that project too, just to make sure everyone, I'm not sure if everyone here has heard sort of the reasons why we're working on beaver in the West Branch, but it's always good to sort of refresh our brains. And then I'll talk about what I'd like to do this year and kind of what the next steps are to make that happen. And then we can have questions and a discussion at the end. These fish here are fish that we caught when we did electrofishing on the West Branch in 2019. So I'm hoping to do that again this year. I would like to plan that. So if you want to see all those fish, you can come help us with that effort, and hopefully you'll get to see them. So, so some background information on how this project got started. We had some summer interns do a habitat survey of the West Branch in 2018. And we looked at all that data and kind of found that beaver were probably the biggest concern for this this stream at this time, and then that maybe after we got a handle on the beaver, we could look at some habitat improvement work. So we started working with the USDA to do some trapping and dam notching, and they did trapping and dam work in 2019 and 2020, and then we want to get some information about what the river looks like before we take out all these beaver dams, and then what it looks like after, so we can make sure we're sort of having the desired effect. So we did some pre-dam removal fish sampling in 2019. We were planning to do that last year too, but last year, sort of 2020 is just a year to write off. So, so we didn't get to that work last year, but this year I think we'll hopefully be in a place where we'll be able to gather again and do some of that in-person work. But we did get temperature data that I'll go through. And then again, I hope we can do temperature again this year, because that's really valuable information. So first about beaver, right? So they belong here in Michigan, they live here, but sometimes they're not always the best thing for trout streams, especially here in Michigan. So some of you might, we're all TU members, or most of us, I guess. So you might have seen some recent information about some beaver reintroduction work in the West. And I could see how that could be confusing when we're trying to get rid of beaver here, and out West, they're trying to add them back into their environment. But so there's some big kind of differences in terms of how our streams function and how those streams function. So the biggest is that in Michigan, we have low gradient sandy streams. And in the West, they have high gradient mountain streams. They call them freestone or boulder streams, right? So out West, the limited habitat types are slow water with soft substrate. And as we all know, that is not one of our limited habitat types in Michigan, right? We have lots of slow water with sandy or soft substrate. So in the West, beaver, and also there's a lot of stream power in those mountain streams in the West. So they are steeper and they get a ton of spring melt. And so that pulse of flow in the spring is, I mean, we get floods too, but it's just a different scale. So those streams are able to clear out beaver dams on a very regular basis. So here in Michigan, our dams stick around for a long time because we just don't have that much power. So the function that beaver are providing there is creating unique habitat in terms of slow, soft habitat. And what happens when we get a lot of beaver in our low gradient streams in Michigan is they keep building dams and dams and dams, and they don't go away because we don't have big flows, and they start to cover up our valuable spawning substrate. And, you know, I'm sure everyone has caught some really great trout in beaver ponds before. But after a few years, about 3 to 5 years, those ponds start to fill in with sediment, and that's often dark in color, and the water warms up. They start to have decreased dissolved oxygen, and they're not great habitat for trout anymore. And now they're also warming up the river as that water flows through. So that's not great for our streams. And then they also prevent wood and sediment from moving through the system, which can lead to erosion downstream because the water wants to pick up sediment and it doesn't have it, and a lack of habitat. So because the type of habitat that's created by beaver is not unique for us, they're often not great for our trout streams. So that's why we're trying to manage beaver on the west branch of the Maple. And we'll see as I go through this that temperature is a real important piece of the puzzle in this system. And so anything we can do to try to keep that water cold is going to be our best way to make that river better. So this stuff, maybe most of you have seen before, but just to give you an idea, when we did that habitat work, I looked at an area, we recorded all the beaver dams. So I looked at an area that had really dense beaver activity and compared it to sort of the section of river in which that beaver activity laid to see how different it was. So you can see there was no riffle habitat. That's your fast moving water that has sort of a broken surface. And 92% of the substrate was fine. So that's sand or silt. So there was really hardly any hard substrate and no riffle, mostly run. And when we compare it to that section in which it laid, there was, you know, that section had some riffle, like it was about 20%, I think, and then a significantly more hard substrate than was found in our beaver area. So we can kind of start to see how those beaver dams are impacting the habitat in the system, and how it might make a big difference to get them out and have an improvement there. So let's see. So for our monitoring, I'm going to get to temperature in just a second. So this is sort of what we've done and what we're going to do. So we got temperature data in 2020, and I would like to put those back in 2021 to continue getting that information. We would like to do an inventory of dams prior to removal. They've been notched, at least all the ones that we're aware of at this point, but they're not fully removed. So we'd like to get some information about them and some pictures and stuff before we fully remove them. And so that work is a high priority for early summer. So either volunteers, or I'll probably have some summer staff who could work on that, but it's something we'll need to do. And what I would picture is we'll have a sheet, and then people will pretty much walk from Pleasant View to Robinson Road. We'll look at that on the map in different sections and get the information about each beaver dam we encounter, so that we can set up a plan for getting them out. And then I'd like to repeat our fish sampling at Camp Road, which is where we sampled last time, just to keep that consistent with where we've been sampling. And I'm not sure, I guess I don't know for sure where the DNR is. So they sample at Robinson Road. They sampled there in 2019, but I don't know for sure where they are. They do 3 years on and then 3 years off and then 3 years on. So I don't know. I don't remember where they are in their 3-year cycle. So we'll just have to keep, I can get in touch with Neil about that. So water temperature, I gotta get rid of these boxes are in my way. There we go. Oh, there we go. So we got temperature data in 2020 at let's see how many sites, 6 sites. And so on this map, the spots are coded by the temperature of the water. So it's mean July water temperature is what's usually used by the DNR to sort of classify streams. So they classify them into cold, transitional, cool, and warm. And cold transitional are sort of your best trout streams, and then cool, it's sort of, you know, it can hold trout, but usually warm is generally too warm. But there's, exceptions to every rule. So we had loggers at Pleasant View, at Ely Bridge, and then this is Cold Creek. Can you see my cursor? Hopefully, this is Cold Creek up here. And then Robinson, Woodland, and Pine Trail. So those two sites high up in the watershed had pretty warm temperatures in the 70s. So the cutoff for warm is 69.8 for a mean July. And then that Cold Creek site was cool, and that category, it's 67 to 69. And then these downstream ones, it starts to cool off, and they're all in the cold transitional, which is between 63 and 67. So if we overlay the beaver dams that I got from Kurt on here, so now these black points are all the beaver dams that Kurt indicated he had notched this year. And you can see up at Pleasant View, there's a few right above there where we have that warm water. And then sort of the same with Ely Bridge. So we'll want to address all these dams this year, but we can start to see that maybe as we get some out, we might get some more flow, some more consistent flow, and hopefully some cooler temperatures. It will always be a little bit warmer in that upper watershed, and because it comes out of sort of like a wetland, and it's always been that way where it's a little bit warmer in the upper parts, but anything we can do to sort of help it be cooler would be great. So I think it would be great if we carried on with these same sites, at least the ones in the West Branch, or even, we could even try to add one maybe at Camp Road or somewhere in here in this middle section. But to continue to get data for a few years so we can see how things change, and also we'll compare it with air temperature too, to take into account differences from year to year in climate, but some additional data there would be great. So this I know has way too much to look at. It's way too busy, but I just wanted to show, so these top two lines, the green and the blackish color, are Pleasant View and Ely Bridge, and then the bottom three that are all sorted together are that Robinson, Woodland, and Pine Trail. So, Woodland and Pine Trail are downstream of where Lake Kathleen used to be, but you can just see a real clear separation in temperature between those two areas. And that's really all I wanted to show, is that you can see that those two upper sites really trend higher than those three lower sites. And Cold Creek just made it too messy, but it falls kind of in the middle. So it goes over all of them. So Cold Creek kind of goes up and down between the two the whole way through. So that's our temperature information. Does anyone have a question? How about, this is probably a good way to do it. Does anyone have a question about the temperature part before we go to something else?
So if we are going to place loggers, when would be the recommended time to get them out there? Because we'd like to do that, yeah.
Yeah, well, so this year is I guess I don't know how your snow is, but it's shaping up to be a pretty easy spring so far for work, right? But so May or June is fine, but okay. May, if it's going to be an easy May for working, May would be great.
Yeah, it should be. Our snow is getting to be gone up here, so we'll shoot for May then.
Yeah, that'd be great. I think I still have your loggers, so I'll get those back to you so you can put them in.
I've got a quick question.
Yeah.
The cooling effect going downstream, do you attribute that to spring seepage, or why is
I think it's
cooler?
I think it's groundwater, and then it's ground. I think it is groundwater, and then it's not. It gets real spread out in those wetland areas up in the upper part of the river. Like it's kind of like really connected to the floodplain, and so then it can kind of sit a little bit. So I think it's definitely it's input of cold water, and maybe a little bit of pickup in how fast the water's flowing through the system.
Yeah, I think the geology kind of changes between that upper river where it's all sand in the swamp, and in the upper river. And you get kind of, when you start getting towards 131, you start picking up cobbles, and you get a little more kind of morainic soil. So I think there's more flow through and more groundwater seeping into the river for sure.
Could it also be that once the dam was taken out, that the water got a little bit cooler with, all that surface temperature up above, and the fact that there's still been beaver dams in the West Branch that was keeping the streams warmer.
Maybe, but it has, but I would say Neil has indicated that their data going back in time has shown that the West Branch has always been a little bit warmer in the upper headwaters area, and then it cools off as it flows down toward where Lake Kathleen was. So there could be some, some cooling that's carrying up from the dam removal, but I do think that it's mostly the geology as Greg described. It just kind of changes as you move from there. If you go to that upstream Robinson Road crossing and then go down to the downstream one, it's like a whole different river. I mean, it doesn't even look the same at all, so I think it really just changes in that geology as it moves downstream.
Yeah, and unfortunately, I think as it gets closer to Burt Lake and the gradient slacks out again, you probably have more warm water issue.
Yeah.
You don't see brook trout down there very often, occasionally, but it's kind of warm.
Yeah, I think that's true. And that's tricky, deltas are deltas. So it's always going to slow down at that downstream end, but hopefully the sediment load will decrease at some point here, and hopefully it can kind of flush out and get a little bit less clogged up down there.
And go where? It doesn't matter.
All right, I'm ready to go on to the next thing. So beaver dam. So this is the same map we looked at before that shows these beaver dams that we for sure want to address this year. I do want us to, walk through there and see if there's any others that we don't know about yet, just to make sure we kind of, get as many as we can out of there. These are a couple pictures Kurt sent of dams that he notched after he trapped out beaver. So just for perspective, and then I'm going to we'll see if this works. So I have this temperature and beaver dam information up on an online map that you can interact with. And so that link is in the presentation, and then I'll send it also to Eli so that he can email it out as well. I'm going to try to go to it, but sometimes this works in Zoom and sometimes it doesn't. So we'll just have to see. All right, so here's the map online. So I'll give you the link, and when you come, it will come up like this. So usually it starts with this. There's a toggle over here with about and content and legend. You probably just want legend because it tells you what things are. But if you wanted to turn something on or off, you can just click the boxes over here. So basically what this map is showing, it's the Maple River, the whole watershed. So these are the watershed boundaries. And then the rivers are they're color coded by temperature. So yellow is cool, blue is cold, green is cold transitional, and red is warm. And those are the temperatures that the DNR has it classified as. So it's sort of like what they think it is, but it's, only based on so much information. So, so what we can see is if our temperature, so these dots are our measured mean July temperature data, which is what they base those estimates off of. So if our measured temperature was aligning with what the estimate was, the colors of the dots in the streams would be the same. So our upstream warm sites are coming in right now. We're measuring them a little bit warmer. They think it would be, it's thought to be cool, and we're measuring it at warm. And Cold Creek is thought to be cold, and we're measuring it at cool. It is worth noting that there's a dam just upstream of where we were measuring, so that's probably not an insignificant factor. And then down here, so then from there down until Lake Kathleen, it's supposed to be cold, and we're measuring at cold transitional, and then these downstream sites were aligned with what the DNR thought they would be. So it's not really real important, but it just kind of gives perspective about what the river is, supposed to be like, and what we're measuring. But, keep in mind that all of those are based, the temperature estimates are based on modeling and whatever data is available. So they're certainly not perfect. The red flags are the beaver dams. So you can click, I didn't have time to clean up the pop-ups, but I will at some point and then it'll update. But you can click on these and it'll tell you the site name. So that's just where it is. The Latin long, which I need to add more digits to those. So it makes, it's a longer number, but I will do that. And then mean July, and this classification is what the mean July temperature puts it at. So if you click on a dot, that's what it's telling you. If you click on the river, it'll tell you about the river itself. And then the beaver dams, similar, it'll just pop up what number it is, the GPS, and the date that it was notched. But this way you can take a look at it if you guys want to. I might try to get some pictures up on here if I can at some point, but for now it's just this, but it will be available to peruse at your leisure. And maybe I'll try actually also, I will try to put our pebble count data from down here. I'll get some summary information of that up on this map at some point too. I'm just going to make a note of that so that you have access to that data. So let's see. So the sort of the next thing to think about is how we're going to move towards getting the dams removed. So we need a new land use permit because they're short. So we're working on getting that submitted. So that's just, we need to put in a permit with the DNR to trap and remove dams on their land, basically. We also technically need an Eagle permit for beaver dam removal. So I talked to our Eagle staff about this. It's a general permit, so it's real simple and it's only $50. And they said, people don't always get one and it's not a huge deal in most districts to not, but technically you're supposed to. And she said, actually, you can probably, it's easier to do what you want if you just get a permit and tell them what you want to do. So I have that ready to submit. I just need to get an agent letter from Eli so I can submit it for you. So that one, it shouldn't hold us up. That should be quick. It's just a real simple one. So then we'll need to do that pre-assessment of the dams and then develop our removal plan that follows the DNR guidelines. So, and then y'all can get together and rip out some beaver dams. So DNR has some kind of specific guidelines about how they want us to remove the dams. So we're gonna do our best to follow those guidelines as best we can so that we can make it beneficial to the system. This is just like an example inventory form, but I plan to change it a fair amount. It's just one that Neil from DNR sent that they use, but I'm going to change it up a little bit and include some more habitat information, but that'll be what we'll get when we assess the dams before we remove them. So these are the DNR guidelines. I don't need to read through them all. It's not, we'll figure that out as we get to a work day. It's really just what makes a difference is how high the head is. So what distance there is from the downstream end to the upstream, like difference from the stream bottom to the top of the dam. If it's more than 8 inches high, they want us to breach it in stages. So they want us to take out some wood and let it calm down and then take out some more until we get it down to the stream bottom, just so that it's a little bit more gradual process if it's a bigger drop. But other than that, it's pretty, kind of normal stuff. Put the debris on the banks, not in the river, breach it in the natural stream channel, all that sort of stuff. So the biggest thing though is to keep track of the sand and silt that's moving, and if it's excessive, stop. So I guess that's sort of a judgment call, right? But keep an eye on it. And then they want us to remove them from upstream to downstream. So in order from the upstream-most dam to the downstream-most dam. And so there's a lot of discussion about that tactic, but so generally, when you take out a beaver dam, sort of a certain area of sediment is going to move, sort of regardless of, irrespective of there's a certain, like, irrespective of how broad the sediment pile is, there's still only a certain area of that sediment that's going to move downstream. So if you remove the upstream dams, the upstream most, and then work down, all that sediment gets trapped in the next dam, and you end up moving less sediment overall because some gets trapped in places where it won't move from removal of the upper dam. So it sort of acts as like sediment traps as you're moving down, and it reduces your overall contribution to the system. So it shouldn't be terribly inconvenient to go from upstream to down. So we can go ahead and do that. So we do good things. I wanted to let's see. Why don't we let's do questions, and or Tony can correct anything that I said wrong about beaver before we move on to fish. And then we'll sort of wrap up with next steps. All right, great. We'll keep going. So
I had a quick question. Sorry, I wasn't unmuted. So we were talking about doing a float down the river to just kind of mark all of the dams in April. Would we need to do the inventory then, or would it be useful to just have the locations? What do you think?
Well, I mean, so yes, it would be useful to just have the locations, but I would like the inventory to be so simple that you might as well just do it while you're there. You know what I mean?
Yeah, that'd be great.
Yeah, so I will get you a form next week that I think should work, and then you can let me know if it seems like it would be reasonable to do while you're floating, and we can go from there. So
Okay.
I'll put a note for that too.
We were looking at like the second weekend in April, or
Okay.
April 10th or 11th.
Perfect.
One thing, if you don't mind, I'd like to add to that is if you
Sure.
you can classify those dams as active or inactive, and in mid-April, you should be able to distinguish between the two. I mean, if there's any fresh cuttings, there's not going to be leaves on there, but you should be able to tell. I know even last fall stuff will be fairly well preserved in the cold water, but you should be able to tell as you're floating and whatnot, if you can distinguish. That would be helpful to us to some degree. And I know it will change from mid-April to probably the time we get in there, but at least we would kind of know that.
Yeah, we can definitely do that.
All right, thanks.
Thanks, Tony. That is on the form, but it is helpful to have some information about how to tell if they're active or inactive. So thank you. All right.
I'm curious.
Go ahead.
Sorry.
No.
I was curious. How do we know how many beaver? Well, we probably know how many came out of there, but how many are still left that would be creating new dams or maintaining existing dams?
I
Do we have any data
feel like
there?
Tony is much more qualified to answer that than me.
Yeah, I'm going to say from an agency standpoint, when we left, there was none. Whether you believe that or not, but the thing is right now, Gary, is, and I do some trapping on my own, on some down on the Manistee and stuff that's close to my house. And there's absolutely no beaver sign there right now. And I just put out certain sets for travelers. And I expect in the next couple of weeks, I'll catch a handful of beaver with absolutely no beaver dams, no sign or anything, just because the fact that they're going to start cruising around and moving around and looking for these places to set up. So you probably heard me say this before. This is a never-ending, nonstop maintenance program. It's just if you can get it, the hope is you can get it to a maintenance program, and we're doing a very, very small section of stream right now in regards to say the Wisconsin program. But the idea is to move forward and expand. But yeah. the idea would be when we left, there was nothing there, in the fall, but there will be in the spring typically. And I will say, adding to that, I'm really surprised that the few number of beaver that we've taken out of that section of the west branch of the Maple, to be honest with you.
So you would have expected to trap more than you trapped, huh?
Yes.
And seen more beaver activity as well? Did you
As well.
Yeah, okay.
Yep, sure
Well,
would have.
That's great insight. And a good reminder that it's not a project, it's more of a process, right?
Exactly. You know, there was a guy that really simplified it and dumbed it down the best way I could ever think of in Mississippi when I worked down there. He said, you got to look at it like your yard. You just have to mow it, you know, throughout the growing season. And we're coming into the growing season.
Yep.
Thanks, Tony. Thanks,
Yep.
Christian.
Okay. So most of you have probably seen sort of a summary of the fish sampling we did in 19, but just in case there's any new people who want to hear about it, it sort of also acts as a plug for volunteers to help with our sampling this year. So we did a mark recapture population estimate at Camp Road. So what that means is we have a electrofishing barge. So it's like a towable boat. So the boat really just holds the generator and the box, and you pull it in the river and shock the water, and the fish get stunned and you scoop them up. And so in our marking run, we go for 1,000 feet and we clip the tail fins of any trout that we catch. And then we come back the next day and sample the same 1,000 feet and count how many trout have clipped fins and how many aren't marked, and then do math, and you get a population estimate based on your sort of efficiency. So at Camp Road, we got mostly brook trout. It was brook trout dominant. They were between 2 and 11 inches, with 3 inches being the most common. So it seemed to really be good nursery habitat at that particular site. The average length was 5 inches, and we had 672 brook trout per acre, 37 pounds per acre. We got 20 brown trout between 4 and 16 inches. So typically, to do a population estimate with mark recapture methodology, you need 50 individuals to do an estimate that has any sort of, that isn't just a wild guess, basically. So we didn't have enough brown trout to do an estimate at that sample site. So for comparison's sake, down at Robinson Road, where the DNR samples, that's the lower crossing of Robinson, in the same year, they got 742 brook trout per acre, 38 pounds per acre, but they also had enough brown and rainbows to do population estimates. So there were 350 brown trout per acre and 310 rainbow trout per acre, which were mostly pretty small. But so there was more individuals downstream at Robinson Road than we had at Camp Road. So just sort of as a comparison, the habitat at that Camp Road site is pretty nice. It's not bad. So I think it will be a good site moving forward, and we can kind of keep track of if anything changes as we keep sampling. So I'd like to do that again in 2021. It's a pretty fun day. It's kind of hard work, but it is also fun. So just keep it in mind if you're looking for a volunteer opportunity. This is just a linked frequency of the fish that we caught. So this brook trout is pretty indicative of the size we got mostly. So you can see there's, so we didn't take scales to age fish. So when you don't have scales to age them like trees, so you can count rings on their scales like a tree, you can look for age groups in the length frequency distribution. So this is the count of fish, and these are inch classes. So an inch class is any fish that's between 3 and 3.99 inches is a 3-inch fish. And then as soon as you get to 4, you're a 4-inch fish until you get to until you get all the way to 5. So The inch class is that whole inch group. But what we can see here is that we have kind of 3 age classes, really. There's these 2, 3, and 4 inch fish, and then these 5, 6, 7, maybe 8 inchers. And then up here we have a couple that are probably age 3. So these are well or 0. So it's zeros, 1s, and 2s pretty much here. We call these young of years are aged as 0 in fisheries speak for whatever reason. So I guess because they're not a whole year old yet. But so that's just to show sort of the size distribution and the ages there. So at that site, what we don't have is fish living a lot of years right there right now, or at least not staying there. They're getting out of there by about age 2. So plans and next steps. So we need to, as Tony said, the beaver management is a long-term thing. So we need to continue working to manage the beaver, and then we'll also continue our work to collect that pre-removal data at the dams, and then get the dams that are there now identified and get them out. And then we can continue that temperature monitoring, which we've already decided that we want to keep doing. So I'll get those loggers set up and sent back out to you. Continue fish sampling. We could think about if there's another site we wanted to add, we could do that. It's we're already there, so you know it's twice as much work, but only the same trip for me. So if that's something that's of interest, we could think about it. And then after we kind of get most of the dams, get the dams out in the stretch of river, we can start to figure out if there are some areas that would benefit from some habitat work. So some additions of wood that are acting as meaningful habitat rather than beaver dams that are just sort of blocking the flow of the river. So there's probably some opportunities to do some of that habitat work throughout the stretch of river once we get all these dams kind of taken care of. And I also wanted, oh geez, there we go. I also wanted, I didn't have this one on here, but I just wanted to also check in with you guys about if you are wanting to keep doing or have been doing the pebble counts downstream also. I realized I know last year it didn't happen. So I was just gonna check in and see about that as well. But then that's kind of all I have. We can have questions and discussions now. I'm gonna stop sharing my screen so people can see each other.
Kristin, I got a question for you kind of about the sediment stuff downstream
Yep.
from the dam. You were out there with a bunch of guys from DNR, guys and gals, what, in 2019?
Oh boy.
Floated, was it 2019?
When we
I don't even
floated.
So after the dam came out, it was in the fall.
I
was just
it might-
wondering what sort of info have they been able to put together, if anything, on how that
That's a good-
sediment boom was going downstream?
That's a good question. And I'm going to have to look back. I can't remember if it was, I guess it would depend. I have to remember the timeline of it all. It feels like it was longer ago than 19, but maybe it was in 19. And I don't think I ever saw a final report, but I will look back through my emails. I know I got some small, at least a sort of like a real quick summary from Patrick. But I'm not sure he really sort of finished it up or done everything he wanted to with it, but I will check back in on that.
Okay, yeah, that'd be just be interesting to know how that's moving down. I mean, and I think too, if we're going to continue to do temp logging on the river, we might think about some of those further downstream locations. There is all that DNR property down there along Brutus Road. And it's an interesting part of the river, but it's, it'd be interesting just to see how it looks.
Yeah, we'd have to purchase a couple more temp loggers, I know, and I think a couple of them, their batteries are dead. Right, Kristin?
Did I say that? I don't
They
know.
have a
I don't know
2-year
if
lifespan?
Oh yeah, but they don't. I mean, that's if it's on and recording like every day for the whole year. So usually they do last a little bit longer than that.
Okay.
When I plug them in, I'll be able to see how the batteries are. I can't remember if the loggers you guys have. I think they have replaceable batteries, but I don't know that for sure.
Okay.
So I have to check on that. but I'm pretty sure I'm pretty sure they have replaceable
Okay,
batteries.
good to know.
Yeah.
As far as the sediment monitoring, if you think it would be useful, we're game for continuing for sure.
I do think it would be useful to have a couple more data points on that. Because, we definitely saw some changes happening over time as stuff was moving downstream. And I do know, that day so what Greg is referring to, I went out with DNR and CRA and a few other people, and we sort of went all the way from Lake Kathleen down to, I think, Brutus Road, and
You guys
basically,
went all the way down to Brutus, yeah.
yeah, right. I mean, so I was in the up, like we were in teams, so I was in the uppermost from the Lake Kathleen down, but we measured how much, like, the depth of sand in the river all the way down, so that they could so that DNR could try to figure out like the quantity and how it was distributed in the river. So I do know that at that time, so we're thinking it was in the fall of 2019, the sand was sort of, where did they say it was mostly stopped by about around Pine Trail, was where it was sort of dropping, like it had, the plume had sort of stopped, but I'm sure it's much further down now. And what I don't know is if there certainly was still, after that effort, there certainly was still some sand coming into the system after that time. So I would be curious to know what our sites look like at this time. And it would also be interesting to know. I mean, it would be cool to repeat that effort with DNR. I don't know if they would be interested in that, but it would be neat to see how it's changed since we last did that.
Yeah, we can definitely schedule those, as soon as it's safe to go in the rivers, we'll be out there.
Yeah. Yeah. Great.
All right. Well, if there are no more questions, I guess we'll wrap up our meeting. Thank you so much, Kristin. This was extremely informative and really helpful to learn what our next steps are. So thank you very much.
Good. Thank you.